Elizabeth and Booker have a relationship in the narrative, which is, she's the entity that all the sort of the powers that be in Columbia want a piece of. Everybody's, Hitchcock would call her the MacGuffin. Everybody's pursuing Elizabeth, and your job is to get her out of Columbia. What she wants is she wants to be in control of her own destiny. First, she wants to get out of that tower that she's been trapped in, and then when she's out of the tower, she realizes she has these powers that she can't quite control. She knows in order to control her destiny, she has to be able to get control of these powers. So that's what she wants out of the world. And there's a very interesting and sort of intimate relationship that's formed between these two characters during the course of the game. And but in terms of her Elizabeth's function from a gameplay perspective, there are these things in the world called tears, and everybody can see these tears in the world. And what tears are is basically there are things that don't exist in our world but might. And everybody can see them, but Elizabeth can actually make these things that might exist in our world actually exist in our world. So, for instance, you're in a battle with a bunch of enemies, and you'll see these tears, and you might see like a piece of cover that doesn't currently exist, or you might see an entryway to another part of the map that might exist, or you might see you're fighting like one faction, you might see members of the other faction who don't exist in this world but might exist, and basically you get to say to Elizabeth, bring in those members of the opposing faction to help us fight, or bring in that access to another part of the map, or bring in a skyline that doesn't exist, bring in some weapons that don't exist, bring in a turret that doesn't exist. But you can only in the beginning of the game, say you see those three things in a battle, you can only bring in one of those. You have to choose what you bring in. And Elizabeth, as she sort of gets more comfortable with her controlling these powers, she's able to bring in more of them. So her ability to bring in more stuff over the course of the game increases as the game goes on.
Can you talk a little about some of the inspiration for the unique world itself? Because those skylines are really, really cool gameplay.
Well, in the first Bioshock, we had this great setting that was at the bottom of the ocean and the city of Rapture. And one disappointment I had in our own work is that we never really were able to pay off being at the bottom of the ocean outside of from the visual perspective. We never were able to sort of bring that into the gameplay. And one thing when we started Infinite, we knew it was going to be in the sky. We sort of made it a mission. It's like, this time we're going to really pay it off. We're going to figure out a way to bring that kind of open air, that kind of verticality into the space. So we started thinking about how we're going to do that. And we kicked around a lot of ideas like flight and stuff like that. But I didn't think at the end of the day flight was that interesting, because a lot of games have flight and it sort of lost its magic to some degree. And so we started thinking about, like, well, how would people get around the city? How would they move freight around the city? How would, and I started thinking about, well, they probably have some kind of rail system, like some kind of sky, some system to move freight around. And we started with that. We said, well, what if the player could use that to actually maneuver around the vertical spaces in this game? And I started thinking about, wouldn't it be, like, I always loved roller coasters when I was a kid. And I started thinking about, like being in a battle on a roller coaster that's stacked on another roller coaster, that's stacked on another roller coaster, and with guns, And that was really exciting to me. And so we started working on it. It was really challenging, but once we had that feeling, that viscerality of being on those skylines, and then figure out how they would work in this world, how they would look in this world, how they would feel in this world, it got really exciting for us, and we were really happy to be able to show sort of where we are with that today.
Can you talk a little about the openness of this world? Because you were talking about during the demo that you could do any objective by a lot of different ways. When you were trying to take down that Zeppelin, there was a lot of different ways to go about doing it.
Well, like there's a part in the demo where somebody sets off a security system. You're in the first Bioshock, when the security system went off, a bunch of little sort of bots came in. And in the demo you saw, when the security alarm went off, a giant Zeppelin with these rockets came in, which is much more appropriate for the kind of spaces that we showed in the demo. But you had to take that, and in order to continue, really, it was, the thing was wailing on Booker and Elizabeth. So Booker decides that he's going to try to take it down, which makes sense. But at first, he tries a perfectly legitimate tactic, which is shooting it down with rockets, which he could do. And he tries to instantiate a turret in the world through a tear that he asks Liz, but she's not able to bring that in right then, because she won't be able to control it. She's nervous. She won't be able to control it if she brings it in, because the amount of stuff you can bring through the tears is controlled through some kind of resource system. So Booker decides, well, the best way to deal with this Zeppelin is to get on the skyline and battle his way up to where the Zeppelin is, because you can see a skyline goes by where it is, and he does that, and it's getting up is a battle in itself, and you have this whole sequence in the demo which people will be able to see. It's just this crazy fight to get up to the top, and jumping, and he sort of almost gets on, but then but a bunch of rail cars come by and he can't get on, and he has to go all the way back down again. And he's jumping off on roofs and getting into these gunfights. So there's just it becomes a whole part of the combat experience, and it's pretty open-ended. The skyline portion of the combat experience, but it's just another way that we ask the user to say, like, look, how do you want to deal with this challenge?
Now, you also tease a tear where people go forward to what looked like 1982. Can you just touch upon how the story maybe is not all going to be in one locale, or that there's mysteries to be unsolved here?
Well, all I'll say about the tears and what you saw there was that Bioshock games are always sort of trying to tap into things that were in the scientific brain space at the time. So Bioshock 1 took place in the late 50s, early 60s, and it deals with like what Crick and Watson were starting to figure out the structure of DNA at that point. I think about mapping the human genome. And obviously the characters in that game took that work and went crazy with it, and went completely crazy. But it did reflect what was going on in science at the time. And in this game, Elizabeth is not a scientist, but she's tapping into, with these tears, what was happening in physics at the time, around the turn of the century. Guys like Einstein, guys like Heisenberg, and the kind of work they were doing. And they're understanding that what they understood about the universe, what they understood about physics, was so limited at that point, and everything was just complete. Max Planck and all these guys, everything was just completely opening up, and at the same time as it was opening up, it was getting even more baffling than it ever was before. And so Elizabeth's tapping into that, and I don't want to ruin any of the details of the story, but we do always like to reflect what was going on in science at the time in our own very Bioshock way.
And speaking of science, how has advances in your game engine technology opened up things for you guys creatively in this game?
Well, it's a different engine than we had before. It's a really different engine. We had to throw, for better or for worse, we had to throw away everything we had in the first game because we could not build. That engine was really good for building sort of these tight corridors and these essentially underground structures. It would appear like.